Good evening and welcome everybody. This evening the conversation topic is From Britain's Abuse of Irish Prisoners, linking Irish political imprisonment to the hunger strikes in Britain today. And with us this evening are our Peadar O'Donnell Socialist Republican Forum panellists, Patricia Campbell and Barry Murray. Thank you very much to everybody for joining us. It's great to see some familiar faces and new faces too. So tonight we're going to shine a light on those who've been targeted, those who've been silenced, and those who've been criminalised for resisting systems of domination. And that system has been named by yourself, Barry, as the capitalist system. The system that nobody ever wants, that the capitalists themselves never actually name. And we're going to look at individuals and groups who've been incarcerated in the past and currently incarcerated, and what this actually reveals about the ongoing Zionist machinery of imperial control today. And sure, of course, we know only too well here in Ireland that these structures operate to support the ruling class and to diminish and disempower and put fear, the fear of God, into the working class. So the repression isn't confined to the past, even though we're very proud and honoured to be in the company of yourself, Barry, who knows from your own lived experience as a political prisoner yourself what it's like. And we're going to talk in particular, address this with you, Patricia, because you have you're in current talks and collaborating with the Filton 24. You have very close links with prisoners, and you have been over to London yourself, not just to support the like a kneecap in court, but actually the prisoners, who many of whom now are on hunger strike. So if you can give us an update on that after an introduction from yourself, Barry, if that's okay, to introduce the topic and just examine the cases of those that are in prison today and also in the past, and what the conditions are like, what they faced in the past and today too.
Well, political prisoners, I suppose, are something that it's an inevitable part of struggle against the system, and the system likes to brand political prisoners as terrorists, just as they branded the Palestinian Action as a terrorist organisation. That's a measure indeed of the system's political weakness in many ways. We had the same examples throughout the 1981 hunger strikes. In fact, right throughout the whole struggle, prisoners were branded as criminals. They tried to enforce that in March of 81, or before that even, and it never succeeded because the people knew different. The struggle was legitimate, and there was nothing that was going to change the opinions of people out there in the street. It's only when elections came along, and everybody has their own ideas about elections, it's only when the elections of prisoners came along, elected North and South at the time, that the British government in particular was sort of taken aback. Now, maybe they weren't, but they certainly were taken aback in the public sense, because, I mean, in Fermanagh, South Tyrone, where I'm from, over 30,000 people voted for Bobby Sands, I suppose a terrorist. Nelson Mandela is the world's most famous terrorist, who then became the world's most feted and talked about leader. So these things are very fickle in ways, and the system uses it any way they can to their advantage, if they can. It doesn't always work out for them, and that's part of resistance. And resistance within the jails, certainly in my experience, is something that just goes on all the time by the very act, for example, of speaking Irish within the jails. I mean, a lot of us learned our Irish within the jails. They were never taught Irish in schools. Our culture, as we know, has been subjugated and put down at every level. In fact, it's surprising the number of people in times gone by that were actually ashamed of their culture, actually ashamed of the Irish language. That was never the case in the jails. In fact, that's where the strength of it came from. That's where the Irish schools that are now proliferating right throughout the north and some parts of the south as well came from ex-prisoners, ex-political prisoners who went out and started to set up schools, Irish language schools, right across the north. Today in Palestine, we're talking about a whole other category. We're talking about somewhere between 10 and 15,000 political prisoners held hostages by the Zionists. The level of torture, the level of killings even within the jails is really unprecedented. The number of people held in what they call executive detention is simply internment, that as we knew it, is something like 11,000 people. People have just been arrested off the streets of Gaza and disappeared into jails, maybe never to return ever again, come out in a body bag. I mean, what's going to happen with these political prisoners? What's the resolution there? And then what happens when all those political prisoners who have spent their time learning, becoming politicised within the jails, when they get out? They're not going to accept no for an answer. They're certainly not going to accept a no maybe. So all of these things, prisoners are a central part of resistance, always are. And they deserve particular support and they deserve the assistance and of all of us. And we have, in the north today, we still have political prisoners. There are political prisoners in Maghaberry. There are political prisoners in Portlaoise, simply because they resist the occupation of the 6 counties. Now, okay, some people may say, well, you know, they're dissidents. Yeah, of course they're dissidents. We're all dissidents. Everybody that decides to go against what the system tells them to do or the system wants them to do is a dissident. Nelson Mandela was a dissident. Marwan Barghouti in Palestine is a dissident. And he'll remain a dissident as long as he resists and as long as he doesn't accept the system around him. So, I mean, this thing hasn't went away. It hasn't went away at home here either. And there'll be more prisoners. Because the reality is, if you confront the system far enough, they'll attempt to isolate you. If you confront it even further still, they'll imprison you. And if you confront them even further still, they'll kill you. So let's be under no illusions about what the system will do to those who dissent, those who resist, and our political prisoners. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barry, for that introduction and overview and joining, you know, the connections here in Ireland in our past, but like you said, also currently, and then looking at the most extreme and horrific, incomparable conditions in Gaza right now. Patricia, I'd like to hand over to you now because you are doing great work in the Peadar O'Donnell Socialist Republican Forum with the Five for Palestine. And I have to say we're very glad to be a part of that as well and to have attended and supported many of the conferences across the country ongoing, which take huge work. And one of the conferences that we attended was actually one of the mothers of the Filton 24 there who spoke. There's an upcoming event as well on Friday, so not to put too much pressure on you, Patricia, but to give us a bit of those who might know about Five for Palestine, might know about the conferences and might know about upcoming events. And I see Betty here as well, who is a great dairy activist, and that's where the next upcoming and very important event is going to be held, where guest speaker Tommy McKerney will be in presence. Thanks, Patricia.
Yeah, Well, the first thing I would like to say is that the tactics used against Irish prisoners, Irish political prisoners, are being used now in Palestine. And the tactics used against Irish political prisoners didn't just happen in 1980 and 1981. It goes as far back as the Fenians and probably further back than that. But Tommy McKerney read a letter from Marx to Engels, a letter that was written in the 1860s, 70s, and he outlined the torture of Irish prisoners then. Now, we know about the hooded men. Most people will know about the hooded men and the sensory deprivation and the terrible torture that it galvanized the people onto the streets during the H-Block Armagh campaign of 1980 and 81. So imprisonment, the issue of prisoners goes to the heart of communities, and it certainly goes to the heart of communities in Palestine, because imprisonment is something that every Palestinian is impacted by. They have either a relative, a brother, a mother, a father in prison, and they could be imprisoned anytime themselves. So we have convened a number of conferences, very good conferences. So we collectively decided to call ourselves Five for Palestine, because we are working directly with a prisoners group in the West Bank. It's an official representative group of Palestinian prisoners in the West Bank. So they identified 5 demands, and if you don't mind, I'll just read those 5 demands out. They're very simple. 1, a global observatory for Palestinians in Israeli prisons. 2, Israeli authorities be made answerable for crimes against Palestinian prisoners. 3, international human rights organizations secure humanitarian protection for Palestinian prisoners. 4, EU and international organizations implement the BDS program. And 5, movements worldwide support the Palestinian cause and the release of all its prisoners. So we called ourselves 5 for Palestine. Now, we have the Filton 24, who are also prisoners for Palestine held in English jails. In fact, there's 33 prisoners held in English jails at the moment, and 6 of them are on hunger strike at the moment, and there's a complete media blackout on it. And it's very important that we bring awareness to these hunger strikers and to the plight of the prisoners for Palestine in England. So just before I finish off, I know I could say much more, but we are running an event, and I'm glad Betty is on here tonight, a great organizer in Derry. She complains that I give her too much work. But we are running an event on Friday evening, and it is the eve of an international launch of the Free Marwan Barghouti campaign. He is considered to be the Nelson Mandela of Palestine. And we will be running an event at the Free Derry Corner at 6:30 this Friday evening, the 28th. We have a wonderful artist on board called Kieran Dunleavy. He will be projecting images onto the Free Derry wall. And Tommy McKerney will be the main speaker. Tommy, who is in the Peadar O'Donnell Socialist Republican Forum. He's also, as many will know, a former hunger striker and H-block prisoner. And hopefully Eamon McCann will also be available, someone who has a historical connection to the Free Dairy Wall. So hopefully Eamon McCann will also be able to speak. So I think I've sort of summarised it as pretty much.
Thank you, Patricia. We might delve in a wee bit deeper though and look at even the conditions of the Fulton 24, and maybe we might get an update on, the hunger strike. But you'd have been aware, you'd have been very involved, Patricia, yourself in campaigning for the prisoners on hunger strike in the 80s, 80 and 81. And what you mentioned there, Patricia, was that there's media blackout at the minute with regard to those who are on hunger strike in England at the minute. Do you think it's similar now, worse now? I remember as a child myself seeing it on TV, seeing the marches, the demos, and hearing updates on the conditions of those on hunger strike, even on BBC, as biased as it would have been reported. There's absolutely nothing on any of those mainstream news channels now. Or am I just remembering that different to the reality?
Well, do you see?
What would you say, Patricia?
Yeah, well, indeed, I cut my political teeth during the hunger strikes of 1980 and 81. I mean, that was in Ireland, and we were very organised, because when I say that there is a media blackout, there's a media, what you would call a mainstream media blackout on the hunger strikers in England at the moment. Of course, not everybody watches the mainstream media anymore. So people are aware. It's very worrying that, I mean, there's a number of women on the hunger strike. I think it's 6. And Betty, probably if Betty was willing to speak about it, Betty's keeping very up to date with it. It's very worrying at the moment for these prisoners in English jails. And I think it's up to us as activists to raise awareness and to campaign for these prisoners.
Absolutely. And Patricia, do you know exactly what the demands are? Because I know there were particular demands upon the first hunger strike. And we demonstrated outside the British Embassy here down in Dublin, and there were 3 very clear demands. Can you share what the demands are for those who are on hunger strike now?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if I'm going to get them into order, but one is immediate bail. They deserve a free, they're entitled to a fair trial, and they're not able to prepare for their trial, so they want immediate bail. It is to end censorship. Mail is being withheld from them. Shut down Elbit systems. Prescribe Palestine action, and 1, 2, 3, 4. Immediate bail, right to a fair trial, end censorship, shut Elbit systems down, and prescribe Palestine action.
5 demands. There you go. So 5 for Palestine actually crosses over.
Well, actually, you see, the Palestinian prisoners were inspired by the 5 demands of the 1980 and 81 hunger strikers. So that is how they came about demanding 5 just demands. And it would appear that the prisoners in England are inspired by those 5 demands as well.
Mm-hmm. I see we actually have some guests on, some visitors tonight from England. I don't know if they've actually tuned in. They don't have their cameras on, but it would be great to hear from some people based
That would be
in England.
brilliant. We could,
If
yeah.
you'd like to speak up, please do. In the meantime, I'm going to go back to you, Barry, and if you want to unmute, sorry, I muted you there as a wee bit of background noise, but maybe look at the proscription of, what do you make of that? The proscription of action for Palestine, and even those who wear a t-shirt that say I support, or Palestine action, sorry. What do you make of that? What's your analysis?
Millions, not just hundreds or thousands, millions across the world are horrified, clearly horrified by the Zionist genocide in Palestine. And it's clear that the British government and Western democracies, so-called democracies, feel threatened. And they feel especially threatened by people who are prepared to take action, direct action, against Elbit systems who supply the bombs and materials to kill innocent Palestinian civilians. That's what I said earlier. I mean, if you're prepared to go the distance, they will come at you, and they will come at you with force, and they'll imprison you, and they'll ban you, and they'll try to silence you. And as I said, to finish up, they'll kill you if they have to, by foul means or fair. So their democracy is being threatened. The world order is being threatened. Especially America, I mean, has lost all sorts of credibility throughout the world for supporting such a genocide. The British have lost credibility. So have the French, and especially the Germans. They feel desperate. They feel that they felt that the only option, as they do, was to implement a draconian measure to create what is a normal activist group, to brand it a terrorist group, and to put it under legislation that means that they can carry out arbitrary arrests and, as we knew it here, diplock court type courts, which doesn't need much evidence to convict. So the system feels threatened. That's the reason why. That's the main reason why they feel threatened. And I mean, they're trying to intimidate people, but it's brilliant when you see older people, pensioners and solicitors and some MPs and doctors and whatever else standing there with supporting Palestine action. I mean, I don't know, there's probably 300 or 400 people arrested as a consequence of it at this stage. And I think that's something that needs to keep going, both in England and Ireland, especially the north. So, yeah, the system's threatened. They feel threatened by people who are prepared to stand up and say, no, we don't accept your lies. We don't accept your propaganda. And I certainly don't accept the fact that Palestine Action was arbitrarily deemed a terrorist organisation.
And just on that, Barry, like when we're talking about, if we just broaden the conversation a little bit out there, that an organisation doesn't have to be proscribed necessarily for political activists to be regarded as terrorists. So they mightn't slap a label of terrorist on them, but as we know, we have many comrades, particularly down here when there was the acquisition of empty buildings for housing activism, and those who were acquiring or occupying empty buildings, when they were lifted and when they were brought to court and faced charges, you know, they wanted to really hone the point that they're not criminals, they're political activists, which is really important. But of course, the court system doesn't recognise. They just see them as petty. They're all, and going into court down in Parkgate, you know, down in Dublin, and one person would be up for theft or dealing drugs, and then a housing activist in the middle of that trying to explain that they're not a criminal, that this is a cause. But again, which is, and it's very important though, because let's bring this all together. We started the conversation by looking at the system that has created all of this, which is a capitalist system. So we must not diminish those housing activists who take a stand, and a very brave stand. And that's why sometimes We wonder why doesn't it go somewhere? Maybe we don't have enough people to keep because, they can't arrest us all, but at the same time, if we're not willing as a majority to put our bodies on the line and take that risk, it's very hard just to rely on 10, 20 or a very small group of people. Like Ireland is much smaller than England has, or Britain has a population of whatever, 79 million people. We had 3 people arrested, and I think they're still actually held in custody in Limerick at the minute for their action in Shannon, at Shannon. And well done, and we commend and we salute those 3 activists, following on from, I think there's maybe 9 in total in recent months. Whenever we don't have those resources, like in Ireland, the same number, the same level of people aren't coming out to confront power. It's strange, isn't it, in Ireland? And yet, we're looking across at London and the big cities and thinking they're willing to do, maybe to get arrested, and there isn't the same, maybe, as well, I suppose it's not a prescribed organisation, first of all, here.
Probably one of the things that certainly happened in the North from the time of the so-called peace process, the pacification process in 1998, was that if you demonstrated for better pay, you were reprimanded because you were endangering the peace process. The words were. If you demonstrated against some other injustice, you were accused of damaging or endangering the peace process. So no matter what was said or done, and certainly if you disagreed with the pacification process that was arranged in 1998, then you were labelled a dissident. And that was, the press done that. And people were genuinely, particularly in the North, people were genuinely afraid to open their mouth. And it did spread into the South as well, because the South was a sort of a part of that, and there was a so-called vote that brought the peace, their peace process about, and people were afraid to, say anything. That's one part of it. The other part of it is that the average working person is walking a very fine line. They really can't afford to bite the hand that's feeding them. They're buried to their eyeballs in mortgages. They're trying to feed, educate, and whatever else their children, and they can't. They're afraid to say anything. They're afraid to do anything. You can lose your job now for politically expressing your opinions against anything. You can be brought before a disciplinary committee. We have examples of it in the North here. So people in general, and the other part of it is that relatively speaking, compared to other countries, people in Ireland, particularly in the south of Ireland at the minute, they're not hanging by a thread per se. They're not starving per se. Well, I know all these things are relative, but they don't see themselves as under any kind of pressure. They don't see themselves as being even exploited. They don't even recognise that. And worse than all of that is that far too many people think that it's not their business to open their mouth or say anything about it. That's the job of politicians that we spoke about earlier. That it's the job of politicians, that it's the job of quote unquote leaders to sort out these things. So people don't even think that they should raise a Palestinian flag. And there's a whole culture has been created around that whole thing of say nothing. Don't open your mouth, don't speak. And it's a very dangerous culture. And that culture has to be broken. That type of thinking has to be smashed. How we do that? Well, we keep putting our message out, and we know the system. We know that the system will continue to make the type of arbitrary decisions that it makes, like against Palestine action. And we know that they will continue with austerity. And we know that they won't build enough houses for the population because it's not profitable to do so. There's more profit in not building houses. And we know that they privatise our healthcare system, north and south. They're at it, they're doing it, they're in the middle of it. Opportunities will present themselves. And we, as political activists on the left, on the revolutionary radical left, I might say, have to take advantage of those situations. We have to use those situations to get messages across to people and get people to understand the way the world works, in fact, as opposed to the way you're told it works.
Mm-hmm. Correct, Barry. Yeah, it's up to us. And when you do know, then the duty and the responsibility is to share what we know. The CP Northwest District, can you hear us? I wonder, would you like to, I take it you're based in England. Can you hear us if you'd like to come in even and speak?
I've just had to take it off mute.
Oh, hi.
Hello.
You're welcome here, comrade.
Very well.
Thank you. My name's Eddie Redmond. I was sent the link by Anthony, so if you want to do anybody in for having me on here, then it's his fault. Okay. Yeah, I mean, thanks a lot for sending me the link, Anthony, and thanks a lot for being welcomed by everybody. I'm finding it quite interesting, and it's quite revealing from seeing a different kind of perspective of what's taking on, and also with the view of that. I think you've seen it all before, personally, in your own communities, and I think one of the things I'd like to raise is that we've seen a steady, and this will probably go into a question as well, a steady increase, a kind of a soft approach at first, and then moving on through stricter policing, more aggressive policing, and then legislation coming on top of that. I saw once there's a Palestinian march every Saturday in Manchester, and I saw a young woman being arrested, and she was detained under the anti-terrorism legislation before the Palestine Action thing was kind of was enforced. Now she had a banner, and they didn't know what it said, so they arrested her and detained her under a terrorism act. So she was 16 years of age, and she was detained for 3 days. So, and that was the start up of that. I mean, I saw that happen. It was quite a brutal arrest. I didn't see who was getting arrested or anything, but they arrested quite a few of them. And then we've seen the slow process of the police stopping people going to the Elbit. We've had members of the Communist Party being detained and one thing or other in the Northwest. And then you see the legislation coming on. The thing I'd like to ask is, how was that kind of implemented in Ireland? Was it done slowly, and then hit with the legislation like that hammer force of the system, or was it always that strict hammer force came in because of the partition, and it got more brutal as time went on? I mean, it's just an overview from that, really.
Thank you, Eddie. Did you say?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, Eddie. Thank you very much for coming along, and Anthony. Great to see you. I think I saw a video of you speaking at the weekend. Is that you? Brilliant, really brilliant. Great to have you both here. There's a question for, I don't know, Patricia or Barry, if you'd like to ask. In my head, whenever you were asking that question, it was like, how did they enact force? I was just thinking plastic bullet. But what were you thinking, Barry and Patricia, if you want to come in as well?
Well, I mean, the Special Powers Act here in the North was the most draconian legislation ever used in what we class as democracy anywhere in the world. I mean, even the South African minister said that he would give anything to be able to implement even one section of the Special Powers Act that was used here in the North over the whole period of since the Northern Statelet was established. So that's what we have lived under now. Now they modernised it and upgraded over the period of the war here, the 30-year war. They added addendums and all sorts of bits and pieces to it and implemented parts of it that maybe lay dormant over that period. And even today, if we hold a pro-Palestine march or demonstration of any kind in our village, then you'll have a lot of police there. If some of the liberal political party, well-known political party, holds a demonstration, there's not a police car or a policeman in sight. And we've actually seen it. We've actually attended their demonstrations and actually saw that. If you conform, if you're prepared to conform at some level or any level, then that's grand. We'll allow you to protest. But I mean, if you don't and you're designated as a dissident and designated as some kind of quote unquote terrorist, then we can't have you about the place, and we'll do everything we can to thwart you or intimidate you, and better still, to intimidate anybody from coming near you to support you. That's the big thing. If you have 20 people there on a demonstration, there's always the chance that you'll get another 10 or 15 people just walking by, stand with you, but that'll not happen, you see, if the police is about, because they are wearing body cams and taking photographs and all sorts of things to intimidate people. And they do it all the time, except when the marches are massive in the likes of Belfast or Derry. They can't do it to the same extent.
Well, now, Barry, doesn't that ring very true? Because I'm just thinking about, the circumstances at UCD, and again, where those who are regarded as more dangerous or terrorists as well will be isolated. And it's really shocking and frightening to see that, there are legitimate anti-genocide or sanctioned or respectable anti-genocide protesters, and then there's the ones who are not afforded the same equal rights to protest, which is shocking in itself. And that it's also that it's allowed, that it is, accepted even by the masses who say that they're pro. So they're, all about equality when it comes to Palestine. But what about on your own turf? What about when we see inequality, discrimination, and particular individuals or groups being targeted? Like, as Eddie was saying, he's noticed members of the Communist Party being targeted and lifted. So, when we talk about bearing witness all of the time, this phrase to the awful atrocities in Palestine, and yet it's accepted and normalised, this cruelty, when we witness it ourselves and we see it and we know that it's wrong, but there isn't the same solidarity afforded amongst each other in the broadest sense on the streets as well, which is just shocking. I might, Patricia, would you like to add to that question from Eddie, just about you might need to unmute there. Sorry, Patricia, we can't hear you.
Yeah, and it brings to mind, the Prevention of Terrorism Act, and now you have the Terrorism Act 2000. And I mean, I lived in London for a period in my life, and I know that there were thousands of Irish people detained at airports and ports, thousands of people detained under this Prevention of Terrorism Act. And the Irish communities in England were armed with solicitors, lawyers' numbers, telephone numbers. It was incredible. And I remember in early 2000s going through, I went back to visit London, and I was walking through Euston Station, and I remember seeing all these people of colour, these brown-skinned people being detained by police, and I just thought, déjà vu. They've now moved from us to the Muslims. Yeah, and it's still, I mean, they say we have peace here in the north, but we only have to look at the Derry protests every Saturday at the Guildhall Square. And we have veterans, civil rights veterans protesting every week, and the police are recording them. We still live in a police state.
Thank you. We absolutely do. Patricia, not much has changed. And when we speak of peace, we really need to check, what does that word mean? And we said last week, no peace without justice. That's not peace. Paul, I'm going to come in here because Dorothy has made a point about our revolutionary memory. And she's referred to, that we've lost even our historical understanding of the past and our desire to be revolutionaries and pro-resistance. I have read articles that you've written in the past, and I've also heard you speak. Oh, and I've heard Barry speak even, and talking about like the nature of the importance of commemorations, particularly amongst Republicans. But to go beyond that we do just consign the past to the past when we repeat the narratives about our great heroes and martyrs, which is very important, by the way, very important. We don't quote James Connolly for the crack because we love the past or because we're romantic about the past. We look at what the message is from the past and how it actually relates to the modern and current situation. Now, what do you have to, Paul? You're quite good at explaining this.
Yeah, I suppose in commemorating the past, but you see a lot of groups, and suppose even Republicans, basically Republicans in general, like throughout Ireland, they love to commemorate the past, but they're away, they sideline themselves from the future, like what is happening now in contemporary Ireland, without kind of making the link that what has happened in the past, the very same system is here today, still exploiting the people. As we always say, the best way to commemorate fallen martyrs there, like say Anthony was over in Manchester with Comrade Eddie, commemorating the Manchester martyrs. The best way to commemorate all the people who's fought and struggled and sacrificed to overthrow that system, the best way we can commemorate them is to continue that struggle and overthrow that system. And as we know, like standing at monuments and standing in graveyards and just giving speeches, that's fine, but that alone, it will not, suppose, liberate us. And again, even there, I suppose Dorothy, and it was you, Rosh, and you were talking about earlier, like saying what's happening to people in England because they have said they've prescribed Palestine action. You can see loads of people out in the street, and rightly so, we commend them, solidarity to them. But in Ireland, you can see like it's so frustrating, particularly around, I suppose, the Palestine national demonstrations. People believe it's not their job. They know stuff is wrong and they don't believe what's happening is right, but they don't really also believe that they have the capabilities to change that. They have their whole power is but in the hands of politicians. Even to paraphrase James Connolly, governments and capitalist societies are but committees of the rich to manage the affairs of the capitalist class. So, and that there is evident to be seen. I suppose what's now coming this Saturday could be maybe the 20th national demo for Palestine. And where are they walking again? What are they doing? They're not being innovative. They're not doing nothing new. They're not challenging power. They're walking to the dial. An empty building. Which to me now at this stage, you're kind of bringing the people down kind of a bad path because you're giving legitimacy to that comprador class in Leinster House. And obviously their interests is to prop up the interests of capital. You know, these are all bourgeois parties. And what does bourgeois parties do? They follow the flow of capital. So they are subservient to imperialism. And it's no different in, say, obviously in Stormont in the north here. It's a colonial parliament. In the 26th county Irish Free State to imperialism. Over a century later, nothing has changed. Also, like even go back there to what's happening in England and the alleged Palestine Action activists going on hunger strike, the complete media blackout, like that's obviously nothing new. Like it was before my time, but there was a serious censorship against Republicans on RTE in the 26 counties. First of all, obviously solidarity with them prisoners because the use your body as a sacrifice is a last resort, but that can, in an act of, suppose, it can gain international recognition. And as you see there, no matter how they tried to criminalise the last phase of an armed insurrection between Republican guerrillas and the British state in the north, they tried to criminalise that struggle. But the names of Bobby Sands and his comrades are now synonymous with international liberation struggles throughout the world, with streets named after, say, Bobby Sands from France in Paris to Iran. Linking past struggles to the future. Everybody wants to be involved with past struggles. It's romantic and it's easy. You just turn up and you maybe stand in a grave. You read a speech out, that's it, you go home, job done. But to be involved now in the future, It takes a lot of hard work, a lot of thinking, a lot of resources, a lot of time. It is where we are. And obviously, even there, what's happening with the British state prescribing Palestine Action as an alleged so-called terrorist organisation, what it's done also, it has exposed the state for what it is, and it has exposed the police to younger people. Because younger people would not have been involved in politics whatsoever, or no interest, and might have seen the ordinary just cop on the street, sure, he's not a bad old lad. They're not, it's exposing their system, and it's exposing and showing, the system for what it is and whose interests they serve. And it's not obviously ordinary people on the ground.
Absolutely. And that's the unfortunate nature of oppression, is that when becomes more and more clear, then all of the structures that are there to keep imperialism safe and sound start to expose themselves as well. And that's where we're at. We can have talk education or whatever, but the best education is to be part of it and to see it with your own eyes rather than just to hear about it or read it. When you see it, you can't unsee it.
And that's what, when you talk imperialism, Roisin, people think like imperialism is something way, way out there in the sky and it doesn't affect them. But the tools of imperialism, it's the police, as we see in England, the courts, we obviously seen that in Ireland here too, the courts, the police, the education system, the way they use the religious orders, language, the civil service, everything, the media, the tools of imperialism is so broad, and they don't stop, and they will go to any extent in order, supposed to maintain their power and influence over the minds of the people that they are actually exploiting.
Absolutely. And you touched on that one, Paul, the last one, the media, mainstream media. I think people are, when we ask the tools of imperialism to tell the truth or to do better, it really shows that we don't understand imperialism. We can't ask imperialism to tell the truth. So that's why I think the message needs to be very clear when we go to BBC or when we go to RTE, that it's about overthrowing these institutions. It's not about asking them to tell the truth. They're never going to tell the truth, for they are the tools themselves that are creating the whole system that is built on lies. Barry, would you like to come in and then we might open it up to the floor?
I was just going to say that this whole thing of terror and terrorism is a weapon used by the system, as we have seen. And probably one of the best examples of its use and abuse was after the 9/11 bombings in America, when America decided to declare eternal war on terrorism. They went into Afghanistan, they went into Iraq, and they leveled these places, and they went in all sorts of fabricated excuses that the Al-Qaeda terrorists were living in caves in Afghanistan. And they spent 20 years in Afghanistan, and I don't know how many millions, hundreds, thousands of millions, maybe for that matter, on war in Afghanistan, and tried to bomb them back to the Stone Age. The reality was that they weren't able to defeat the Afghan guerrillas. And without warning, after 20 years of war there, they just walked out of it and allowed the very terrorists that they said were the world's biggest and worst terrorists to just come back and run the government as normal. In Syria, they now have an Al-Qaeda leader, a former Al-Qaeda leader, as elected as the president. And not alone that, this dangerous terrorist was in the White House recently, having tea and biscuits with Donald Trump. The war on terror. What is the war on terror? And when you look behind all these things, even in the case of Afghanistan and Iraq, it's about material interests. It's about supplies. It's about oil. It's about minerals. It's about all these things. It's about power. It's just about power and nothing to do. The terrorists that took down, the so-called terrorists that took down the World Trade Center, they were all from Saudi Arabia. That's a fact. Did they bomb Saudi Arabia? No. Why not? Because Saudi Arabia is one of their friends. that Saudi Arabia's bought and sold. But they bombed Afghanistan because third world country, we can go in there and we can do what we like in there and we can kill whoever we like. And I mean, the atrocities that happened there is not even talked about yet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so just on that point, I mean, the war on terror, whose terror are we talking about here?
Exactly. And Al Jilani, I'd just say Barry wasn't even elected. He was installed. He hasn't been elected. There was a bounty on his head.
Yeah, something like 5 million.
And then now all of a sudden he's cleaned up his act and he's been rehabilitated. He's got rid of the long beard and he now looks a wee bit more Western, and he's been one of the first countries to support, to send money was Germany to support the new Syrian People's Democratic country. Paul, you had your hand up there. Come on ahead in.
Yeah, this was just following up what I was last saying about the tools of imperialism and so-called counter-terrorism. We know even in universities here in Ireland, they are putting a massive, massive drive to recruit students. So they recruit young Irish people into the murky world of so-called counter-terrorism. And I happen to know a young girl that was being influenced by this because they offer obviously massive salaries. But a lot of these youngsters, once they're in there, it's too deep. They don't even know what they're getting into. And I asked a simple question back. Well, counter-terrorism, you've an interest in that? Yeah, yeah. Well, could you define a terrorist? See, but like even the young people, they don't understand. They don't get to define what the terrorist is or who the terrorist is. And they're obviously being lured by money, big careers, maybe 80, 100 grand a year jobs. So you can see even there what they're up to. And then as we know, the imperialists, they will create the terrorists. They'll the so-called they'll create their own terrorist organizations, but then they'll promote, even give there now we hear about Hamas, a so-called terrorist organization, but it's gone back that imperialism doesn't have friends or enemies, just interests. Who was it that force promoted Hamas? It was the Zionists and their Yankee backers. And why? Because it suited them at the time to undermine the progressive and left-wing PLO. So again, imperialism, they will go to any extent in order to protect their interests. And at the minute, that's I'm just even very worrying. And I'm sure it's happening. It's nothing new. This is happening in universities throughout England and throughout across the world, deliberately honing in there to poach and work on students, to take them in and employ them and give them jobs. And people, youngsters now, this is going to be obviously, there's no lived experience. There's nobody that tell them any different. And they're very naive and they're going to be sucked into this dirty, murky world. And I suppose it's no different than what I would see even a police officer in the Gardaí or whatever. A lot of these people, they're going in there thinking they're going in there so as to do a job or serve their community. But really, when they're in there, it's completely contrary to the interests of their community. It's just basically you have to say it for what it is. They're like, I call it the class traitors.
Well, it starts even earlier, Paul, I'd have to say, like in
Primary school, probably, Russian, yeah.
Well, first of all, you have to colonize the brain.
Yes.
Second, and you do that to normalize inequality, to normalize poverty. Just some people are poor. It's very sad. And like it just sort of like it's all accidental. And a nice note to end on, because that's what we're about, working class unity. And this is our allegiance is to the working class. And that is what this struggle is all about, from Ireland to Palestine. I'm going to sing you out now I'm not, I'm only joking. I'm just going to leave it there to next week, and we'll see you. Free Palestine, free Ireland, and thank everybody. Thank you to the Chester
Flan.
Conway. Thank you very much.
On that,
Thanks. Bye.
Slán everyone. Thanks a million.